They told Putin he could hold Crimea forever, build the walls high enough, dig the bunkers deep enough, park enough ships in the harbor, make it a fortress that no army could crack. But they forgot the oldest rule of warfare. Every fortress falls the same way, not through the walls, through the stomach. Right now, 60,000 Russian soldiers are trapped inside what was supposed to be their most secure stronghold, and the arithmetic keeping them alive is collapsing one calculation at a time, because Ukraine figured out something Moscow never saw coming. You don't have to storm the beaches when you can starve the garrison. 10 years of preparation are unraveling in 10 months of systematic isolation. Every road, every pipeline, every supply convoy that keeps Crimea breathing is under coordinated attack, not random strikes hoping to get lucky. Surgical cuts designed to bleed the peninsula dry. And the numbers don't lie anymore. Russia is spending more to defend Crimea than the territory is worth to hold. Putin built his Crimean strategy around one assumption: the threat would come from the front. Amphibious landings across the Black Sea, ground assaults through the narrow land bridge, air attacks he could track and intercept. He layered the peninsula with air defense systems worth billions. Mined every beach, fortified every approach, built the defenses to stop an army that was never coming. The real attack came from behind his own lines, through the supply roads his forces depend on, through the rail lines carrying ammunition, through the pipelines pumping fuel, through the command centers coordinating it all. Ukraine studied the fortress and found its weakness. Not the weapons pointing outward, the arteries pumping inward. 5 supply lines keep Crimea alive: the Kerch Bridge connecting to mainland Russia, the M14 highway corridor running 600 kilometers from Taganrog, the gas pipeline feeding the power grid, Black Sea naval resupply routes, and the air corridor for emergency deliveries. Think of them as veins feeding a body. Ukraine has been cutting them one by one, and when you cut enough veins, the body goes into shock. But the real genius lies in the targeting sequence. Ukraine didn't try to destroy everything at once. They demonstrated something far more devastating. They can shut down any supply line whenever they choose, for as long as they want. That transformed every road, every bridge, every pipeline from a reliable asset into a hostage. It works until Ukraine decides it doesn't. The Kerch Bridge tells the story perfectly. On the night of May 16th, 151 Ukrainian drones entered Crimean airspace. The bridge was completely closed for 11 hours. No vehicles, no trains, no ammunition, no fuel. Passengers delayed 7 to 8 hours. This wasn't an isolated incident. May 2nd, the bridge shut again. May 13th, same result. Since January, vehicles over 1.5 tons have been banned from crossing. That single restriction eliminated the majority of military cargo from the bridge entirely. Here's what makes this so brilliant. Ukraine didn't need to destroy the bridge to neutralize it. They proved they can close it at will. Putin spent billions building a symbol of permanent Russian control. Ukraine turned that symbol into a single point of failure for the entire peninsula. The bridge that was supposed to make Crimea invulnerable became the weakness that makes the whole position fragile. Now examine the second lifeline, the M14 highway. 600 kilometers of road from Taganrog through Mariupol, Berdyansk, and Melitopol before entering Crimea from the north. For 3 years, this was Russia's logistical spine. Convoys moved freely, fuel tankers advanced without obstruction, ammunition trains fed the garrison without interruption. That era is over. Ukrainian drones are striking targets 160 kilometers behind the front line. Territory Russia classified as risk-free logistical areas is now contested space. Every convoy commander rolling south makes the same calculation. Will the first arrive or will I burn? The Azov Corps has published footage of reconnaissance drones patrolling directly above supply routes near Mariupol. Military trucks tracked in real time. Fuel tankers detected. Ammunition shipments recorded as they roll. This is battlefield air interdiction, the same doctrine NATO would execute with manned aircraft. Ukraine is executing it with $2,000 drones. From Taganrog to the Crimean border, every link in a 600-kilometer supply chain is now contested. The math is simple. Russia cannot afford to lose even half the convoys reaching Crimea. Ukraine doesn't need to stop them all, just enough to create a deficit that compounds every day. But Ukraine isn't just cutting supply lines, they're targeting the brain that manages the entire logistics network, and this might be the most devastating part of the whole campaign. Russia operates with centralized command doctrine. Every tactical decision flows from the top down. Which convoy uses which route, which roads are safe, when ammunition moves, a NATO sergeant can make independent calls in the field, a Russian squad commander waits for orders. Ukraine identified the command centers coordinating Crimean logistics and systematically destroyed them. The FSB headquarters on Arabat Spit, the border guard complex at Armyansk, the intelligence center managing convoy routing. When these facilities were hit, Ukraine didn't just blind the supply corridor, they paralyzed it. Every unit lost its decision-making brain at once. Nobody had authority to reroute convoys because the intelligence flow had stopped. According to the Ukrainian defense minister, the objective is clear: isolate logistics, neutralize electronic warfare, destroy Russian command presence behind the front lines. This is Ukraine deliberately attacking a structural weakness in Russia's military culture, striking not just buildings but doctrine itself. You cannot repair that kind of damage by sending reinforcements. None of these strikes would be possible without the systematic destruction of Crimea's air defense shield. In 2022, the peninsula was protected by one of the densest air defense networks in the world: S-300, S-400, Panzer I, Tor M2, a layered architecture designed to intercept anything approaching. In theory, in practice, Ukraine has dismantled this network piece by piece over 4 months. More than 500 Russian air defense units destroyed, each targeted individually. First the radars detected, then positions pinpointed, then the systems attacked by swarms of low-cost drones. The cost disparity is brutal. A Ukrainian strike drone costs $250,000. An S-400 battery is worth $500 million. A Panzer S-1 costs $15 million. A Tor M2 runs $25 million. In every engagement, Russia's budget bleeds. The compounding effect is irreversible. Every air defense system destroyed doesn't just remove one unit, it opens a wider corridor for the next wave. When the radar at Tarkhan Cape was destroyed in July, a massive coverage gap opened across western Crimea. Analysts described it as a corridor wide open for Ukrainian drones. This creates a cycle that cannot be stopped once it starts. As air defense erodes, more strikes arrive. As more strikes arrive, more air defense capability is lost. Russia is rushing reinforcements, but those reinforcements get caught in the same loop. Every S-400 battery sent to Crimea leaves another front exposed. Crimea is becoming a blind fortress. The walls still stand, the guards can no longer see what's coming. And what's coming next will determine whether this isolation campaign becomes a collapse. There's one choke point that ties everything together: Armyansk. It sits at Crimea's northern gate where the M14 enters the peninsula through the narrow Perekop Isthmus. Every truck, every shell, every fuel delivery coming by land passes through this junction. Ukrainian drone coverage is creeping south from Zaporizhia, closer to this choke point every week. When Ukraine establishes sustained fire control over the Armyansk approaches, the land bridge effectively closes. Calculate what this means for the garrison inside. 60,000 troops require roughly 2,000 tons of material per day. Ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, spare parts. Naval supply is restricted because the Black Sea Fleet retreated to Novorossiysk after losing too many ships. Aerospace supply is limited to small cargo aircraft under diminished air defense. The margin between what the garrison needs and what it receives is narrowing toward a compounding deficit that grows wider every week. Ammunition stocks deplete first, the heaviest and most consumed commodity, then vehicle fuel, then generator diesel, then heating fuel as autumn approaches. Russia cannot reinforce Crimea's defenses without weakening other fronts. Every electronic warfare system redirected to shield the peninsula is a system not jamming Ukrainian drones in Zaporizhia. Crimea is turning into a resource black hole that swallows an ever larger share of Russia's limited capacity. But the military math is only half the equation. 2 million civilians live on the peninsula, and the impact of this isolation campaign hits them even harder than the soldiers. 85% of Crimea's fresh water once came from the North Crimean Canal, carrying water from the Dnipro River. After 2014, Ukraine shut the canal. Russia improvised with groundwater and emergency desalination for 8 years. Capacity was never enough. Property prices in Sevastopol and Yalta are in free fall. Coastal apartments have lost more than 40% of their value. There are no buyers because no one invests in a war zone. A quiet exodus has begun. Crimean residents who obtained Russian citizenship are leaving. School enrollment is declining. Local businesses are closing rapidly. Young Crimean Tatars are being conscripted into the Russian army, forced to fight for the very forces occupying their homeland. In 2014, Putin presented Crimea as a return home. 10 years later, that home is a dark apartment where the taps run dry, the electricity cuts out, and staying grows more dangerous by the month. Crimea's military isolation makes headlines. The civilian collapse is silent. It's also unstoppable. Putin's responses to this isolation campaign follow a clear pattern. Every response makes the situation worse somewhere else. When the Black Sea Fleet came under attack, he pulled it back to Novorossiysk. Naval fire support for Crimea was removed, and Ukraine's sea drones followed the fleet east anyway. When air defenses eroded, he pulled S-400 batteries from other sectors, including Moscow's own defense ring. The corridors Ukraine's drones used to strike deep inside Russia widened in response. When convoy losses climbed, he pulled airborne units south from the Donetsk front. The Pokrovsk offensive stalled. Putin chose Crimea over territorial gains in Donetsk, an implicit admission of which front he fears losing more. Every move solved one problem and created two new ones. Every redeployment weakened a different front. This is the paradox of defending territory you can no longer afford to hold. The more you invest, the more you lose everywhere else. Russia is not losing Crimea in a battle, it's losing it in a budget. A slow-motion accounting collapse where the cost of defense exceeds the capacity to pay. Modern siege warfare doesn't work with dramatic beach landings and single explosive moments. It works with mathematics. Supply chain mathematics that compound over time until the defender cannot afford to stay. Crimea will not fall in one climactic assault. It will erode artery by artery, tanker by tanker, radar by radar. Russia turned Crimea into a fortress. Ukraine is turning that fortress into the most expensive cage in military history. A cage that swallows resources, swallows attention, and slowly pulls Russia's entire war machine down from within. Not with explosions, with math. And math doesn't negotiate.